Hello, my friends. I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And little Missy sitting back up here in the corner. You can see her up there. She's learning to behave herself. So this is the second time I've done videos this past week, which is rare for me in the first place. But that's the second time I've left her out of the cat carrier. She's learning to behave herself. I had to take her out the table earlier, but it's all good. She's such a good behaved kitty, right? It just is what it is. So what we're looking at here is another installment of second edition for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's Forgotten Realms, the official game accessory called Old Empire by Scott Benny. This was one of those books that when it first came out, it took me a minute to kind of get into it. But when I did, I was glad I bought it because there's I don't know how else the best way to explain it other than to try to ramble my ass way through it. When I was a kid, and we'll go back to the late 70s or very late or very early 70s, because I don't think I was old enough in the 60s to be reading much. Anyway, I read a bunch of the old Conan the Barbarian style novels, and I had a predisposition a little bit on what I thought a hack and slash kind of role playing ought to be like. It was confused with that and Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways is your atypical modern day concept of a fantasy role playing game setting. It is a neo Middle Earth or Middle Ages era where if you were to look at apples and oranges, for example, modern day Middle Age Europe versus any era, the game or the Lord of the Rings era of Middle Earth, there's a huge difference, right? You damn well know humanity still runs shit. And grant you that there would still be far more open areas of unsettled property and stuff in Europe in that era, because humanity didn't dominate in the sheer scale of numbers that we do today, but the atmosphere is different. So when I look at a lot of the Forgotten Realms novels and settings and the books and in the game itself, it's more of this modern sort of hack and slash, or high fantasy would be the term. High fantasy as opposed to low fantasy or sword and sorcery. There's a huge difference in flavor in them. It's just like having settings of using ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and ancient Rome. Ancient Rome would be considered quite advanced for its era, even though it was still pretty much on crude terms when it comes to things like metallurgy and a lot of other stuff that shows advances only a few hundred years later. The difference between using bronze and copper weapons and using iron versus steel weapons. So playing game settings in an older era where your players have their challenges can be more than just the foe. So if you understand the basics of metallurgy, for example, copper weapons or brass weapons were fine for their window when they were in use in large numbers, but they were grossly outgunned, if you will, when iron came along. Iron just literally shattered them. They couldn't and then the weapons themselves were considered brittle, so it wasn't uncommon for a sword to break if you fought too much with it. You didn't maintain it. It was crucial, and even at that point there were still some flaws to it. It's just like both armor and tactics. A lot of that advances as the ages progress. When we talk about good sword and sorcery, the old Conan the Barbarian style, where Conan wasn't running around in plate armor. He was, aside from the fact he was a barbarian, but even all the fighters and warriors that he was going up against, very few of them were literally wearing battlefield suits of armor that were head to foot plate. It was a different era and a different way of doing things. So were their field tactics and combat. So the settings and the atmosphere changes considerably. when you play those. And it's hard sometimes to divorce yourself from preconceptions of what we think games should be like. And a lot of us we get fixated in a certain type of style, and it really defy, it just defies trying to explain it to other folks. But this is one of those ones where Forgotten Realms is such a huge and rich sandbox. The tapestry is so vast. They have so many places that you can explore and operate out of. It's literally quite plausible to run entire years, decade-long campaigns out of one corner of Thay Run and never ever set foot, other than maybe briefly throwing tidbits into your campaign for anywhere else. Like I said, I ran some campaigns in the Moonshae Isles for a number of years, and we never got out past them because there wasn't any need at the time. So this is yet another region, which would be the equivalent of the Middle East in Thay Run. You go down south where everything's hot, a lot of the dry stuff, obviously, and you get these couple really ancient civilizations that have come and gone. So these are empires that are long on their decline, but they're still potent forces in their own little eras. So we talk about the history of the old empires, the land surrounding them, people's society, the Mulharad, current economy. So we talk in the Mulharad, and if I'm pronouncing it wrong, then so be it. And then the society of Unthiar, so civilization of Unthiar. And then we have one for Chestnut. And so in some ways, I would equate this to being the equivalent of, like I said, of ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, and probably trying to think of the empire that was south in Central Africa that was active at that time period, because the Egyptians clashed with them on a regular basis and then conquered more than a few of the tribes in that area. But that would be the equivalent of the area and the region. So you've kind of got that kind of flavor too. If you were to consider your setting to be like Egypt in biblical times, then you would be spot on in playing in these eras, in my opinions. So, I mean, there's so much information. I couldn't spend all day trying to devise down through the different stuff. Right here, it's going on about their interaction with surrounding countries like Thay and Simphar, and Uxtius, the kingdom of the Sagran. That's another thing that's in the neighborhoods. This really huge aquatic empire of these really nasty beastmen, or whatever you want to call them, the Sargon fishmen. Coastal cities, whole slew of them. A lot of these at one time were part of or established by these ancient empires, but then lost, or they either gained their independence or were lost from attrition and distance. We got talking about how the society works. Lots of these quote slaves. It goes hand in hand with this kind of era and time. It doesn't make it right. That can be something you can fight against all you want. Just pointing out that's kind of that goes hand in hand. Go back to Conan the Barbarian, the original works. It's just Conan himself was a slave. It is what it is. So we got a lot of the Egyptian motif stuff going on in here, which is why I said if you really set the setting and picture every movie and series you've ever seen set in biblical Egypt, and you wouldn't be off by much. And there can be some challenges in setting up players for that kind of environment, because a lot of times they're not comfortable with it or accustomed to it. Excuse me. That's something that pops up once in a blue moon and gets, or doesn't always get talked about, is that when we have different eras, right? Most games of significant size, I use Dungeons & Dragons because it's the big behemoth with the best examples. But you have not only eras, but divisions, of complete change. How do you mitigate between them? Well, if I come into players and they say, look, we're going to play a campaign set in a Bronze setting, excuse me. So, here's your playlist, or your equipment list, and your items that you can acquire. Just take to heart that anything that's iron or newer iron steel, most like aluminum, a lot of them alloys, not going to be on the table. Same's going to go with complexity. There's a lot of metallurgy that takes place in making certain types of armors viable. So if you look at a lot of the banded and scale and multi-piece armors, those are the armors that were common in the Bronze and Bronze Age in the Bronze Era. So those would be the most likely. That would be the best armor to get. Full plate armor, chainmail, things like this, probably not going to exist at all. And if, in part because making it out of a lighter, much more brittle armor or metal made no sense. They wouldn't have done it. That's why they had multiple layers of overlapping stuff stitched together and things like this. That was their way of making the best that they had. They didn't know that they could eventually get better. Well, that's just the way it goes. But challenging your players to play that and keep that in mind, keep those stipulations in mind. It's just like playing, another significant difference between playing a sword and sorcery environment versus the high fantasy environment that's often associated is the dearth of stuff and people. Well, what do you mean by that? Look at Conan the Barbarian. If you watched any of the early Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, it's another example of this. Inside of being in the big cities where there's a lot of wealth and abundance, out in the sticks, not so much. And it was survival of the fittest and basic stuff you used around your home to keep yourself alive and functioning. Aside from that, there wasn't a whole lot of extra bells and whistles. And what there were considered craft work or homemade stuff as opposed to manufactured stuff. And this means that we should not take for granted that we can just get arrows whenever we want. It might be a little harder if you need to go barter with a blacksmith to get the arrowheads and then make your own damn arrows. Now, do you want as a player to have to deal with that? It depends on the players and the DM, once again. But the mechanics in the books allow for this stuff. But it's portions of Dungeons and Dragons rule sets that don't get utilized very often, I've noticed. So books like this kind of were inspirations to deal or to delve into that better, and to have that experience as a player and as a game master is great, because you're expanding your mindset to focus or to play outside of your normal round, and or to explore different aspects of these very games that we love and have utilized for most of our lives, and not truly opened up and looked at the other options, because they're there and they've always been there, but a lot of times they get played down. So in this case, it's nice to see that kind of environment, and this is definitely almost like an alien environment without being really out there. So it's a great system. I've read it and I've used it numerous times over the years, mostly as a reference guide for stuff, for settings that we played, because I had a friend back in the late 70s, early 80s, and he was huge in the author of Conan the Barbarian and the other stuff that he wrote, as well as Tarzan and something else, and he was just huge in them. So he was running a Bronze Era campaign setting in I forget what game system we was using. I don't know, can't think of it off the top of my head now, but it was really fun and interesting and a challenge, because we had to challenge things that, for starters, we learned to stop taking certain things for granted. There's reasons why weapons have damage and damage capability of taking damage, and to apply those on a more frequent level changes things. Why does Joe carry 4 swords? Nobody uses 4 swords. Why does he got 4 swords? Well, if you break your swords as often as Joe does, you might carry a spare too. you might be a little more circumvent about picking up that, looking at the next guy's weapon to see if it's better shaped than yours. You know, just a thought. Anyway, I'm Rick. That's the little Missy in the corner. This is the Old Empires. It's a nice little supplement if you can get your hands on it. Like I said, you've got quite a bit. There's some new magic, of course. There's some new critters and stuff. There's references to doing things in the desert in dry conditions. Then we got a nice list of personalities and mercenary companies, adventures in the old empires, and the only regret I ever had was I never got a good group of players to be committed to doing a campaign set solely in one of the old empires, because I always thought it would be fun. But a lot of times you need to have players that are more okay with the storytelling aspect of the game and less of the hack and slash, because when you want to start getting involved in things like intrigue and court drama and stuff like that, well, it's more than just who's got the biggest sword and the fastest dagger kind of stuff. Anyway, till next time, I'm Rick. That's Missy back there.